This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Hey, this is Brian Peña. I always join the Vito podcast, the best podcast in the United States.
And welcome to the latest and greatest edition of Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. I am your host, Vito Chirco, alongside two terrific guests in Nate Bierma of the great Twitter handle Tigers History and Evan Woodbery of MLive.com. Fellas, how are you guys doing?
Doing good, thank you.
Great to be with you guys. Thanks, Vito.
Well, thanks for doing this with me. And obviously, we're in a somber mood because of Kaline, Mr. Tiger, an 18-time All-Star, 10-time Gold Glove winner, a great player and great man off the baseball diamond as well. All these tributes have come in from all these different individuals. Current athletes, former athletes, celebrities, all these people that got to know Kaline love the guy and have spoken glowingly about him since he passed away at his home in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan on Monday. Sad news to see. And even though an older guy, still kind of surreal to see this legendary Tiger figure and Mr. Tiger himself actually pass away. And I digress now as I want to get to you guys. And Nate, first with you on this. What was your reaction? Your initial reaction when you heard the news of Kaline's passing?
Well, we were just talking as we hooked up here about how it was about as surprising as the death of an 85-year-old could be. I mean, that's the age where you can say natural causes, and of course, we don't think the causes have been confirmed. And then my second thought immediately is, was it coronavirus? Because everything in the news these days is related to that or feels like it is. But after that initial shock, just sort of the sadness. I mean, here was this guy who was the icon, who was this, I think, father figure for the franchise. And to be called Mr. Tiger, and he was in this role of post-player Hall of Famer for over 4 decades. And so to lose that figure is just shattering to the franchise.
Evan, for you, your initial reaction to the news of Kaline's passing?
Yeah, I like Nate, I was stunned as well, just because, as I was mentioning to you guys, for being an 80-something, and I've been covering the team for the last 3 or 4 years, to see him in spring training, put on a uniform and go out there and shag fly balls, or to be out there interacting with the players. He didn't seem like he was 80-something. He was in great shape physically, great shape mentally, and I guess I just never. I didn't entertain the possibility that he could die just because he seemed in such, he seemed like such a young person despite his age. And I don't know, it was incredibly sad, and reading the memories of so many people. And the thing that struck me the most, especially for me having covered the team a relatively short time, was just the amount of young players that he connected with. This is a guy that played well before they were born. But he had a way of, his natural humility was such that you didn't feel like you were talking to a Hall of Famer. You felt like you were talking to someone who truly, cared about you and wanted to hear your story. He didn't want to talk about himself, wanted to talk about your story. And so many players, their remembrances were so similar along those lines. And that really struck me, was that this is a guy that, yes, I don't want to take away anything. He was one of the greatest players to ever play the game. But so much of his legacy is everything that he did after his playing career, the type of person that he was, the relationships that he made in the years after he was done as a player. And that really struck home with me as I was reading and talking to people about all their tributes.
And Evan, so in so many words, he was genuine. He was down to earth. He was a great dude. I mean, and young at heart until the very end, attending spring training, a member of the Tigers organization for so many consecutive decades, from a player to a broadcaster to a special assistant in the front office. He was a Tiger great and a Tiger for life. So a great dude with a huge impact on the Tigers organization and on so many different players subsequently for so many years, Nate. Can you reflect upon his impact on the Tigers organization over the years?
Yeah, and just listening to Evan, what came through in a lot of the comments is just this apparent paradox that Al Kaline seemed so regal. He was royalty. He was baseball royalty. He was Tigers royalty. And everybody talks about being nervous when they approached him. I'd be curious to hear about Evan's first meeting with him. And he has this air of royalty, and yet, by all accounts, he was as you said, genuine, down to earth. It made those connections sincerely with the players. He was not just a figurehead or somebody where they said, "Oh, remember who he used to be." He was active and he was out there. So the fact that he was able to maintain that personal connection and make real relationships, because he was genuinely interested, by all accounts, in everyone that he came across, including the young players. I was struck by a couple of the memories, the recent memories that some of the reports included of Al Kaline meeting Riley Green when Riley Green came to Comerica last year after the draft and launched a home run into Kaline's corner at Comerica Park, and then turned around and got congratulated by Al Kaline. And the meeting of the past and the future of the franchise seemed to, not to say that Green will necessarily be the next Kaline, but Kaline was always interested in connecting to the present and the future of the franchise.
And then, speaking of high school, I mean, he came out of high school, Al Kaline, and played right away. Didn't play a day in the minors. I mean, talk about that as well. I mean, Evan, and a guy like that doing that nowadays, it's unheard of. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen for Riley Green. A guy like that who's a great player, potential to be a terrific Major League Baseball player. He's not going to play with the Tigers for the foreseeable future. Al Kaline did just that and was very good before he even turned 20, as you know, Evan.
Yeah, and that was, and I'm sure Nate can talk a lot more about this from a historical perspective, but that was something that really struck me as I was reading Kaline's biography is just that, this is a guy that was heavily scouted from the time he was a very young. He was a highly sought after high school player who signed a bonus that would allow him to go directly to the big leagues without stopping in the minor leagues. He had every reason to be a prima donna. And then once he got to the big leagues, I think there was an expectation that, he'd put his time in for a couple of years and then go back to the minors for more seasoning. There was no expectation that at the age of, as still a teenager, that he would instantly become a star. And, he took some lumps that first year where he was playing part-time, but his first full season the following year, he really did become a star. And so he had every reason to be a prima donna. He had every reason, to think he was a big deal, because from a very young age, he was highly sought after baseball talent. But instead, what you hear even from his youngest years are the stories of the humility and just the kind of person that he was. And, going back to what Nate said as far as him being kind of a royalty or a statesman of the organization, I think that's a big part of it, is the fact that his appeal was so intergenerational, that there was the group of Tiger fans that saw him play, the group of Tiger fans that a little bit younger that know him from his time as a TV broadcaster, and then the youngest group of Tiger fans, and including even the players, the young players, the modern era, that have got to know him as an elder statesman, as a representative of the team. And I think that intergenerational appeal is really, you've seen that in so many of the tributes, is that he's someone that, your grandfather, your father, and yourself, if you're a young person, you can all relate to in your own way, because you all got to know him and see him in some way. And I think that it also makes it cool that, yes, he was a Detroit Tiger from the moment he left high school, but also that he stayed a Detroit Tiger after his playing career, whether it was in broadcasting, whether it was in the front office, that he was around the team literally to the very end, from the age of 18 to the age of 85. That just does not happen. That's a pretty cool thing.
Never going to happen nowadays. Moving forward, 2020 and beyond, we're not going to hear these kind of stories. A player being a part of an organization and pass his playing career for life, for the remainder of his life. I mean, he was a true baseball and Tiger lifer. And now to some Tigers history, with the Tigers history due to an aficionado, Nate Bierma. How about at 20 years old in 1955 when Al Kaline won a batting title and hit 340 at 20 years young? I mean, guys are immature. I know I was in college. I was doing some stupid stuff at Detroit Mercy, okay? I wouldn't have been ready to play and play at a high level in the big leagues. And he was Al Kaline at 20 years young, Nate.
Yeah, and I feel like I should give a disclaimer when you introduce me as a historian. I'm not really a historian. I just play one on Twitter.
But, come up very well playing it on Twitter. I'll tell you that.
Well, thanks. You can fool some people, I guess. But it is remarkable because, as Evan said, the intention apparently was you see this prospect, you really want him, so you put him on the roster as you're obligated to, and then when you fulfilled what was called the bonus baby obligation, then you can send him down to the minors. And then at 20 years old, instead of going to the minors, breakout season. To go back to when he was 18 for just a minute, I was always struck by a story that Al Kaline told a lot, which is his first day in the Tigers clubhouse. He comes in as an 18-year-old. He doesn't know what to do, where to go. He says he hung his clothes on a hook in the bathroom because he didn't even have a locker by his recollection. And one of the veterans, whom he never named, a couple of my followers have done some good educated guessing on who this was, took him and pinned him up against the wall and said, "Listen, guy, you're just a kid. You're here to take my job or my buddy's job. We don't want you here." And that was his welcome to the clubhouse moment. Now, so his humility always was genuine, but it also makes you wonder if there was a piece of him that always held on to that. Cal Ripken always said, well, I thought if I took a day off, I'd lose my job, even well past the point where he realistically could have. You just wonder if that humility was rather forcibly and with hostility ingrained into him when he came up. But it just shows how out of place he was. And then, at 20 years old to have that season, and of course he wins the batting title, and he is the youngest player by 1 day. His age makes him the youngest by 1 day to win the batting title. And of course, the person he beat out was Ty Cobb.
Terrific. I mean, just look at that, Evan. And then how about the fact him and messing around with this current generation of ball players? And really, since becoming a Tiger and player himself, he has had that mentality, carried along with that kind of persona, that joking around persona with the ball players. And even as recent as probably in spring training this year, but last year with the big league club, being around the team, getting to know the players and messing around with them. Can you reflect upon that as well?
Yeah, and that's something that I noticed for myself, and also that you've seen reflected in so many of the tributes, is that there were a lot of conversations. A lot of times you would see Al Kaline in the clubhouse in one-on-one conversations with players, and sometimes they were serious, and sometimes they were jocular and joking. John Hicks was talking about how Kaline would come and give him a headlock every time he saw him, and I saw that frequently. Daniel Stumpf was reminiscing about how Kaline would say, "Hey, Stumpy," and I can still remember him saying that every time he walked by. So he did have real, genuine relationships with so many of the players, and not just the stars, and not just players on the big league roster, but really everyone that he came in contact with, including some guys that never even made the big leagues, that I've read some real poignant reminiscences of just being in spring training and Al Kaline going out of his way to talk to them or to, just to learn their story, which is a pretty big deal when you're a minor league nobody in camp with the big leaguers. So I think that was real and that was genuine. And also something that I think it deserves mention is that, for all the criticism of the Tigers front office at times for being old-fashioned or maybe being behind the times, I think one of the ways in which the Tigers are behind the times in a good way is that, that Al Avila really does. Al Kaline was not a figurehead. He was actually someone that Al Avila talked to on a daily basis. He was someone that Al Avila watched games with during the season, sat down with him and watched games with him and picked his brain. Al Kaline was involved in making, getting input on draft day. He was, if there was a decision to make, Al Kaline was consulted. So he wasn't just a figurehead. He wasn't just, an old timer that walked around. He was someone that really, the Tigers really wanted to be involved in the organization. And I think Al Avila and Ron Gardenhire deserve credit for that because, the reason Al Kaline was around the team so much up until the very end was because his perspective was valued, because they wanted him to be around those young players, and they wanted the young players to be able to talk to him and get his knowledge. He wasn't just treated as a figurehead, but as someone that was really valued. And I think that speaks to something good within the Tigers organization, because that's, and I'll include people like Alan Trammell that you see around every day, Jim Leland. Those are good baseball guys that I think, that obviously, based on the reaction you're seeing from players, that the young players really benefited from having him around.
So he really was working, because I know that special assistant job title is thrown around a lot, and some of these individuals with that exact title don't really work day to day or aren't really glued in, and maybe these front office individuals, such as Al Avila, aren't really going to them and picking their brains consistently. Well, that was the case, as you're saying right now, with Al Kaline. He went to work, and he was trusted in that front office. They went to him for advice, for feedback, and they valued his insight. So you don't always hear of that, I know. And like you said as well already, Evan, he really got to know individuals. So even if you were a middling ball player, as you have said and others have said in their glowing tributes about the man that was Al Kaline. And speaking of you on that front now, when you first got to know Al Kaline, do you still remember that moment when you had your first conversation with the Tigers legend?
Yeah, I'm sure it was my first spring training, and I remember my mom's husband, kind of grew up in that era and just loved Al Kaline and the Harmon Killebrew and Mickey Mantle. That was his era. That was the era of baseball that he loved, and for him it was such a thrill when I was able to tell him that I'd just spoken to Al Kaline. But, like millions of other people have said, it begins with you being the one nervous, and but really it quickly changes, because he's not an intimidating figure at all. He was someone that really had a knack for putting people at ease. And, I think the recollections that are almost so universal was just that, the initial nervousness quickly giving way to a normal, friendly conversation, because, really he did not act like the Hall of Famer. He acted like it was opposite, that he was interested in you and was interested in learning your story, much more so than him. And that's, I think that's obviously, it's when we talk about, it's a lesson for all of us, I guess, and that, a big part of your legacy is how you treat people. And he certainly has been remembered very fondly for that.
You know what, Evan? He's baseball royalty, deemed as that because of that as well. How he was off the field and how he treated people. And you might not have been, once again, a fellow Hall of Famer as he was, but he took the time to talk to you once again and try to get to know you. He was a terrific individual on and off the baseball diamond. And like I said, back to you now, Nate. I mean, truly baseball royalty and a baseball Hall of Famer. So can you now talk about his lasting legacy as a baseball player and after his baseball playing career ended as well?
Yeah, his legacy will certainly be defined by the person he was in retirement. I do think we would be remiss if we didn't say anything about his playing career more specifically. And of course, none of us saw him play live. We've all looked to the previous generation and heard the way they spoke about Kaline, the player, but the descriptions of how he played with such grace and fluidity. Vito, you and I talked before about Lou Whitaker, and that's the thing that I was struck by watching Lou Whitaker. Just so graceful, so natural, no wasted motion. He just looks like he was born on a baseball field and just doing things so effortlessly, even though, of course, he wasn't, even though it took a lot of effort. There's one story that stuck out to me just that I have to highlight. Joe Falls, the legendary columnist, asked Al Kaline, "It seems like you make more catches closer to your shoes in Cleveland's Municipal Stadium, which of course was that cavernous old, really football stadium. How come it seems like you're reaching for the ball there in that stadium in particular? And he goes, well, in that big old stadium, you can't hear the ball off the bat quite as well. He listened for the ball off the bat. And the reason he always appeared to be in perfect position was because he just played the ball perfectly from the moment it was struck. And so the natural grace with which he played, the statistical steadiness, I mean, to win the batting title at age 20, and then to be a key contributor on the 1972 division-winning team. 68, he had something of a down season, but came back strong in the World Series. The steadiness and the durability. I've been thinking about this. I'm wondering what you guys think. I have this theory that Detroit and Michigan fans in general are drawn to those players who are steady and understated. The Barry Sanders, the Steve Yzermans, the guys who make it look so easy, even though it's not easy, and who go about their business, don't ask for a lot of attention, that Detroit really identifies with those stars and really wants to lift them up and celebrate them. And Al Kaline certainly personified that. And so he was a legendary player by all accounts, and that enough would make him a legend. But his legacy is the stuff that we've been focusing on today, the person he was. One point I wanted to make that really struck me is when Al Kaline talked about his retirement, he said there was no blueprint for what to do next. Here I was retired, I didn't have a college degree, and there was no playbook for, well, you do this, and then you become a special assistant. He sort of had to feel his way into that job and invent it. Of course, he became a broadcaster, and then he became special assistant, which we said was a very active role for him for a long time. So to be a dominant player, a legendary Hall of Fame player, to be a down-to-earth person and yet also be such a regal figure that you're called Mr. Tiger, there will never be anybody like that again, I don't think, for the Tigers or maybe for Major League Baseball. But that will be his legacy, the way he was an ambassador for the Tigers and for the game for such a long time.
And then you said it, understated and down to earth and humble. And then when I say those three things, those three adjectives about Al Kaline, I think of Alan Trammell. Alan Trammell being the closest thing to that today. And for the Tigers as a special assistant in their front office currently. And Trammell, I think, is another guy that the front office goes to for advice. They lean on him at times, right, to pick his brain and to get feedback on players. And I think he's the closest thing now for the Tigers to Al Kaline.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And actually, I was going to say the exact same thing that you did, is that there are so many similarities there, both in, just spending the entire career with the Tigers, but also the type of person he is. I think and I mean that as an incredible compliment to Alan Trammell, and also an incredible compliment to Al Kaline that we're comparing those two individuals, because I think there are an awful lot of similarities between the two. And as far as just steady player, great player, but also someone incredibly down to earth and someone that takes great pride in being a Tiger. And also, I think as I was looking over there was a video of Al Kaline's Hall of Fame induction that was posted that I thought was it was almost old fashioned in some of the phrases he used, but in a really good way. Just because he talked about it being an honor, he talked about it what a great accomplishment it was, but he also talked about it as being a privilege and almost an obligation that now he's in a Hall of Famer, and that he's going to do his very best to uphold what it means to be a Hall of Famer. And I thought that was such a very poignant way of putting it, and also just reflects very similar to me also to Alan Trammell, was that it was something that both are, when you think of a gentleman, you think of both of those guys. And for Al Kaline, it was a great honor, but it was also a privilege that he took very seriously to represent the Tigers, a privilege that he took very seriously to be a Hall of Famer. And that he treated people knowing that he was not representing just himself, but representing an organization and a lot of other people. And I think that's when you think of what a gentleman is, that's kind of what you think of. That also had so many parallels to me to Alan Trammell's recent induction to the Hall of Fame, because those are two people that I think of very similarly.
Trammell and Kaline, two great gentlemen. And I'm alongside two great gentlemen right now. And my guests on this week's episode of Tigers Talking, Evan Woodbery and Nathan Bierma. So I appreciate all the time so far. And let's get to this now. Back to his playing career and the great fielder, the great outfielder, Nathan. You kind of already started talking about that. But I think at times people forget how good he was fielding because he was such a great hitter too. And you could argue, maybe make the argument as a 10-time Gold Glover that he was even a better fielder than hitter. And that's up for debate. And people might come up in arms at me and say, oh, you're totally ludicrous on that front in saying that. But there's probably an argument you can make. And I guess my point in all of this, and what I want to ask you now, Nate, is how great of a fielder was he? And where do you think he ranks all time among the greatest fielding outfielders that the game has ever seen?
He's right up there. And some say that his legacy may have been slightly diminished through no fault of his own, just because he played in the exact same era as Roberto Clemente, who for many was the greatest and most graceful right fielder of all time. But he wasn't that far behind. And again, looking back at his playing career, which again, none of us witnessed, but just to hear him described as such a versatile threat, hitter, runner, fielder. And again, we think of Trammell and Whitaker because they too were good at so many different things. In fact, as we've talked about before, we say in their cases, would they have gotten into the Hall of Fame earlier or more easily if they had a 60 home run season and were known as home run hitters instead of just being really good and really steady at every aspect of the game. We have to talk about Kaline's arm too. And we've seen clips of him gunning down players from right field. Clemente, of course, too, did that so gracefully. I love the clips of Bo Jackson, gunning guys down at the plate. But with Bo, it looked like a cannon was going off, and it was. With Kaline and Clemente, it just looked so natural, like just almost a soft toss, and then it was a laser that was right on the money at home plate. And just to have a whole area of the field and the stadium named for yourself, Kaline's Corner. Of course, he had an injury early in his career at Tiger Stadium, then Briggs Stadium, where he ran into the wall, and the owner moved the right field wall along the foul line to give Kaline more room to run balls down. And ever since, it was called Kaline's Corner. And to this day at Comerica Park, that's how the right field porch there reads. He really was identified with that entire area of the field and that entire corner of the stadium. And that too, I think, is rare. You can be a great first baseman, but when the entire right field area and corner is named for you, that says something about how much you define that position.
And I think it speaks volumes, not only when it comes to the man that he was, and that's part of his lasting legacy, but also the fielding and having a corner like that, Kaline's Corner, named after him, a spot in the outfield like that, named after him. It speaks volumes about his lasting legacy as a baseball player. And he was truly a baseball lifer. So I want to get to this really quick with you, Evan, now. His lasting legacy, you think, was what?
Well, I think we've probably touched on it, as just his affiliation, not just over a playing career, not just over a post-playing career, but over almost an entire lifetime with one organization, is something incredibly rare and probably getting rarer as the years go on. His ability to transcend generations. And, and like Nate said, I think you can't overlook what a great player he was. He was, the Mickey Mantle of the Detroit Tigers during that era. Certainly one of the best players to ever play the game of baseball at all during the entire history of baseball. So I think, that's his legacy. And obviously we're in strange and uncertain times right now. And among the many disappointments of this season is that, depending on how things go, who knows if we'll have the opportunity to have some sort of a fitting tribute or of some sort during the 2020 season. If there is a 2020 season, it may have to be delayed to 2021, depending on what happens. But certainly, I think he's someone that's deserving of a true fitting memorial and send off whenever that is possible to do so. And obviously that's one of many uncertainties right now, but I think that will be a special moment, just I think because it's, he's one of the most important sports figures in Detroit history. And I think the inability to do any kind of send-off right now is among the many unfortunate things.
Well, almost you can bring up, and this has been now like a daily debate on Twitter, especially since he passed away, but where does he rank among Detroit pro sports greats? He's right up there, top 4, top 3, maybe even number 1, Nate. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so if you have a Detroit Mount Rushmore, and I should have thought this through earlier, but you'd have Gordie Howe. I think you'd have Barry Sanders. I should probably defer to you guys to say who would be up there, but Al Kaline would certainly be there. In Tigers history, obviously it's Ty Cobb, Hank Greenberg. I think Hank Greenberg is underrated just for his historical significance and all the things he went through. But there was no one face of the franchise, as great as those other players were, the way Kaline was. And so to be able to be, as I said, the father figure of the franchise for so long, even if he didn't necessarily have the number 1 playing career as a Tiger, although it was at least top 5, just the way that he personified the team and personified baseball in a lot of ways would certainly put him at the top for the Tigers.
And there's also Steve Yzerman for the Wings, right? Gordie Howe, maybe even Ted Lindsay. And you brought up Barry Sanders, Ty Cobb. Hard to put together a Mount Rushmore of Detroit pro sports greats. There's been so many of them. And I think Detroit as a pro sports town is underrated, almost too. So got to give some love to Detroit pro sports and all the legendary figures that have come through the city throughout the years, such as Al Kaline. And I think if you were to debate Tigers greats in that Mount Rushmore, just for the Tigers itself, I think you would have to bring up Miguel Cabrera now. What do you think about that, Evan, and where Miguel Cabrera even fits into the history of the Tigers and the Mount Rushmore of Tigers greats, along with Al Kaline and let's say Ty Cobb and maybe Alan Trammell?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's definitely you have to put him in the discussion. He could retire tomorrow and he'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer. And although he hasn't played his entire career with the Tigers, the most significant years certainly were. So yeah, I think he'd be part of the discussion. And I think, when we're talking about the intergenerational legacies, you have the Al Kaline of the 1968 championship Tigers. You have, Lou Whitaker and Alan Trammell and Jack Morris and Kirk Gigson of the 84 Tigers. And then certainly of the modern day Tigers, you have Justin Verlander and Miguel Cabrera, as far as guys that are, among the best in the game and 2 guys that are headed to the Hall of Fame. And it does make you think. I think there are lessons for, obviously Miguel hopefully is still going to be playing for a few more years after this, but I think there are lessons about, your post-playing career and how that you can kind of choose how you want to ride into the sunset. That there are, Al Kaline chose to be affiliated with the Tigers and really make an impact in the 4 decades after he stopped playing baseball. And Miguel Cabrera, I think, will have the same opportunity if he wants it, to continue to be involved in the Tigers and be kind of that elder statesman person. And, I think if there is a lesson, it's that, yeah, your playing career gives you the credibility to have an impact on young players and to have an impact on an organization and to be an icon to fans. And, you can choose to use it any way you want. And Al Kaline, Alan Trammell are guys that chose to use that in a really positive way. And I think are going to be remembered so fondly because of it. And obviously Miguel Cabrera will be a guy that has that same opportunity.
So guys, Al Kaline played a long time with the Tigers before ever winning a World Series crown. How fitting, Nate, was it that he finally got a World Series championship in 1968? Because it seems like a lot of Tigers fans and Detroit pro sports fans would have been up in arms if he would have never won a championship with him being Mr. Tiger.
It's so fitting, and it would have been such a shame, in part because we do elevate those who do win the rings to another level. Even though for the bulk of Kaline's career, it wasn't his fault that the Tigers weren't a championship team. He just didn't quite have the pieces around him. And then, of course, when it did happen in 67 and 68, the Tigers were strong pennant contenders both of those years. And both of those seasons, especially 67, Al Kaline missed a lot of games due to injury. In 67, he broke, was it his wrist or his hand, slamming his bat down in frustration, which is so uncharacteristic with the persona that he embodied. And then the Tigers just narrowly missing out on the pennant that year and then coming back strong in 68. And, of course, another consummate Kaline story is when it came time for the World Series and the Tigers had 4 quality outfielders. Kaline said to manager Mayo Smith, I haven't earned it this season and last season. I haven't deserved to be out there. I didn't win the pennant the way the other 3 outfielders did. And Mayo said, no way, we're going to figure out a way to get you in there. And, of course, the risky move that paid off, moving Mickey Stanley to shortstop so that Kaline could play. And Kaline contributed a huge hit in Game 4 and Games 4 and 5, sending the series back to St. Louis, and when they ultimately prevailed. And he was a big reason they got that ring. It was so fitting. It would have been such a shame, even though it wouldn't have diminished what he accomplished individually. But it was just so fitting that he and that entire team could be called world champions.
So he was 11 for 29 with 2 home runs and 8 RBIs as the Tigers won that World Series championship in 68 in 7 games. I mean, once again, speaks volumes about the great player that he was. And to win a championship, to finally see him win a championship, then it was so darn fitting. So his legacy, guys, will live on forever. So I'll leave the Kaline discussion with that. But one last question and topic to leave you guys both with. Will we see Major League Baseball regular season action in 2020? Evan, first with you on this one.
I'm going to say yes, although not with a great deal of confidence, but I'm going to say yes, just because, I'm sure you've read about the Arizona idea that was floated a couple days ago, and I'm not sure that's going to happen, but it tells me that they're considering every option on the table. They're ruling nothing out. And realistically, I think, and this is not just baseball, but this is any sport, you have 2 options right now. You can say, okay, we're not going to do anything until I have a vaccine, which means it could be 12 to 18 months before we have live sporting events. Or you can say, we're going to try to be really creative. We're going to think outside the box. We may consider things that we had never considered before because this is a very unusual situation. And I think they're going to do the latter. And I have no problem with that. And whether it ends up being Arizona or something equally strange, I don't know. But I think there will be baseball, and I think it will at least initially be in empty stadiums. And, I for one, am looking forward to that day. I know that some people, it rubs them the wrong way to talk about sports in a time like this, but I think it would be a good thing, not just baseball, but any sport. And I think we will see baseball this year. It's just the details are still to be worked out.
Definitely. And Nate, simply different times right now. I mean, baseball being played in pro sports in general and all sports in stadiums without spectators. Baseball, if it does resume, that sounds like the most likely scenario for regular season action in 2020. But anyways, I digress. And now your thoughts on whether or not Major League Baseball will have a regular season this year.
Well, for the longest time, I've been thinking, a July 4 opening day would be kind of cool. July 4 is sort of a big baseball holiday, summer holiday, and have opening day on that day would be sort of fitting. Now, it's far be it from any of us to speculate on how this epidemic, this pandemic is going to play out. One of the biggest factors that some say is, will there be a second wave and a third wave? And so there's not going to be one moment where you can say, okay, now life will return to normal and we're out of the woods. There's going to be caution every step of the way. I, like Evan, am hopeful. I, like Evan, could accept baseball in Arizona. It would feel weird. It would feel like spring training for the entire season, but at least it would be something for us to watch and gather around. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And still have a sense of hope that maybe we could hear the ump say play ball on the 4th of July.
Would love it, man. That'd be one heck of a Independence Day celebration here in the US of A. So I would love to see it happen. Wishful thinking for right now. And hey, we just got to keep safe right now. And remember, that's the biggest priority, right? Our health and safety, and the health and safety of everybody out there moving forward. And guys, with that, best wishes to you two moving forward as well, dealing with these current hectic times with the coronavirus pandemic. Stay safe and healthy once again. And I always love talking to you both as well.
You too, Vito. Thanks a lot, guys.